Alright, and welcome to this lesson where we're going to continue on developing the events page. So the first thing I'm going to do is take a look at creating the code for the side navigational menu. And the way I'm going to do it is not by actually writing it inside of this function right here, because if I'm to iterate through the months, weeks or days, whatever it is, and I'm just really iterating through, then I'm just going to create a lot of work for the browser, because it's going to have to initialize the function, which means it's going to have to take it, chuck it into the JavaScript engine, and then it's going to get interpreted, and then of course once it's executed it will delete it. And so what you're doing is you're creating a lot of work right here. And when you actually look at all the code that's needed for this side navigational menu, you need the speed. And so the speed is to do with the memory management. So what we need to do is take our functional code, leave it in memory, not delete it and then create another one and delete it and then create another one and delete it. Leave it in memory and just point to it in the memory. And that's what makes JavaScript very quick. And of course that's what makes jQuery very quick, because it uses the prototype. So what I'm going to do is create a jQuery plugin, which is effectively attaching itself to the prototype, creating a function in memory that we can reference via a pointer. So what I want to do is I want to leave this right now. This is absolutely fine. Yeah, we're going to call back a function, but inside of here I want to actually call my plugin. So let's leave this for now and let's create a jQuery plugin, which is very simple to do. And I'm just going to create this plugin up here because we're actually going to have to run the plugin in this block of code, but I'll explain that in just a second. So what I want to do first of all is put the $ in and then say fn. So what this is actually doing is it's going to attach a function to the prototype chain. Now again, we're not using the native syntax right here, we're using the jQuery library, but again it's very quick because it's using the prototype chain. So we're attaching this to the jQuery library, and then what we need to do is give our function that we're storing in memory a pointer so we can point to this function. So I'm just going to say get menu, just like so, and then we're going to say equals, and then we're going to create the function that is going to be stored in the memory, and we don't need to give our function a name. So this is called an anonymous function, and so we're going to obviously reference it by its pointer. So once I've done that, let's go ahead and take a look at the code. So now what I can do is take out this code real quick just to test it and paste this in, and then what I can do down here is call back my plugin. So we're going to create an empty jQuery object, and we don't need to target anything, so nothing needs to go in the brackets. But then I can say dot get menu, and once I've done that I can then just open and close my brackets because we have no arguments that are being passed in, so therefore we have no arguments right here. And then I can just end with a semicolon. I can save this now, we can hit refresh, and all I need to do is take a look at the console real quick and see if that string is being passed in, which of course it is, and you can see right there that number is increasing every time I click. And so this will allow me to write lots of code right here inside of this function, and what it means is we're not going to be compromising our performance. So now what I can do is start to write some of the code. So firstly what I want to do is go ahead and target the sub menu, and then I want to target all the anchors that reside inside of there, and then simply I want to remove all of them. So I'm just going to say remove and end with a semicolon. So if I save that now, I hit refresh, you'll notice that when I iterate through that it simply removes all of those anchors, ready for a new set of anchors to be placed inside of there. So now what I want to do is create two variables. We have C month and C year. So the C stands for current, so current month, current year. And both of them are targeting the cal variable, which is targeting this element calendar. And then we're running the full calendar method, and we're telling it to get the date on both of these variables. And so what this will do is return a date object, and it will get the current date of our calendar that we're currently viewing. And then what it's going to do is, as it's returning the date object, we can then use some of the date methods. So for example, get month. So this is actually going to return the month's value for the current date that the calendar is on. And then also we're going to have get full year. When I say get full year, it's going to return 4 digits for the entire year, so 2014, 2012, 2013. Now you'll notice with the get month that I've put on here the +1. The reason why I've done that is because JavaScript is a zero indexed based language. So what that means is January isn't classed as the first, it's classed as 0, and February is classed as 1, and so on and so forth. So the reason why I've put the +1 on there is so that January is now the 1st, and then December's the 12th. So instead of going from 0 to 11, we're going from 1 to 12. And of course, when we display that in our side menu, it's going to be a lot more understandable for the user. And so now that we've gone ahead and done that, what I want to do is take a look at filtering my data. So if we take a look at this next block of code, we have a variable with the name of found. Now this variable is going to contain all of the relevant events for that current month. Now what we need to do is actually filter our data, which, as you know, we're pulling in our data from events.php, and then it's being passed out to an array full of objects, and that array full of objects is now being assigned to the file variable. So now the file variable is within the scope of the plugin. So now I can point to that array full of objects. And so now this is where the grep method comes in, because it allows me to filter through each individual object and determine whether I want to keep it or get rid of it. So first of all, we need to tell this method where is our data, where is our array full of objects, and so that's obviously in the file variable. Now what's going to happen is with each individual object we are going to run a function. Now the function is having one argument that's going to be passed into it, which is the object itself. So the object just on its own is being passed in to this argument. And then what we can do is check that object to see if it has a property and a value that we want, and if it does, we keep the object in the array, and if we don't, then we simply get rid of the object in the array. Now it's important to note we're not affecting the array of objects in the variable file, we are only affecting the objects in the array that is actually in the found variable. So now what I can do is say only return the objects that have the property menu, so that's the menu property right there, and it needs to have a certain value, which, as you know, we have the month and then we have the year. So what I'm doing here is I'm saying concatenate both together the current month and the current year, and if it matches, then we want that object. So in this case with March 2014, we are going to have all of these 5 events right here, or 5 objects return in our array, and the last one isn't because that's in December. So what I'm going to do is again make sure that this is concatenated in a string, because if I didn't say I wanted this to be part of a string, then what it will do is it will actually add them together, because this is actually returning a number, which is something that we don't necessarily want right here, because we want to check the value of the string. So that's why I'm concatenating this in a string and not treating this like a mathematical statement. And so now what I can do is simply write console.log, and I can pass in the found variable, and then when I do that I can just simply hit refresh, open up the console, and then I can click on the button. So you'll see there's an empty array for February. Now yes, there are 2 events down here, but they belong to the other month, which is March. You can see here that they are the other days, and so that's why we get an empty array. With March we get 5 objects because there are 5 events in March, and then you can iterate through all of the months, and in December 2014 we have 1 object right here because there is 1 event on the 28th of December. And that's how this works. So you can see now that this is very simple. And so now that we actually have the relevant events for the current month, what I want to do is then display that information in the left-hand side navigation. And so now what I can do is I can iterate with jQuery each element that is inside of my array. So in our case, an element in our array is an object. In our specific case, it could be a number, it could be a string on its own, but in our case, it's an actual object. So it has multiple different properties and values. And so I'm iterating through each element of our array, which is stored inside of the found variable. So the found variable contains the current events for that specific month. Now, each time it finds an element in the array, it's going to run a function. Now, the function allows us, first of all, to identify the index in the array. Now, in our case, we don't actually need that, but that will just basically give us the index. So, for example, the first one is going to be 0, second one's going to be 1, index number 2, 3, 4, 5. It's just a way of keeping the elements organized and finding out what index they have, but in our case we don't need that. Then the second argument is passing in the element of the array, just that specific element. So that could be a string, it could be a number, or in our case it's an object. So it's just passing in that one object into that argument. And now, with that specific object being passed in, I can target all of its properties and pass out that data into the side menu. So in order to do that, I'm going to target the element with the ID of submenu that contains all of these anchors right here, and also the input as well. And then I'm going to use the append method. The reason being is because we've already removed all of the anchors, but don't forget that we still have the input and the span at the top here. And obviously we don't want to get rid of those, so that's why we've not used the HTML method. We've used the append method, and so the anchors get added below all the current child elements, which will be just the input and the span. So now that we've done that, what I'm going to do is say, okay, well, for each of our objects that are found within the found array, what I want to do is I want to create an anchor for each. I want to look inside of the current object that is in the array, and then what I want to do is I want to grab the URL property. So obviously that will give me the URL to the event page. Then what we're going to do is open up the strong tag right here, because don't forget the strong contains our title and date. So first of all, what I'm going to do is look inside of that current object and then take a look at the title property and parse that out. So that's the title of our event. Then after that, you'll notice that we are concatenating again a string right here because we want to put in a space between the title and the date. And then I'm going to look inside of the object, and then I'm going to look at the start property. As I said, all events must have a start date and also time, but we're not interested in the time, just the date itself. And so what I'm going to do is inside of there, I'm going to say get date, because don't forget that the start property is converted into a date object. So I'm using the get date method for the date object, and what that will do is print out the day, so that'll be 4, 11 or 23 and so on and so forth. Then also we're concatenating a string, we're putting the hyphen in right there, and then we have the month. So that's what I'm doing there. I'm putting in the variable cmonth, because don't forget we've already got the month right here, so there's no point in us trying to get that data information out. And so that's why I put in cmonth. Then we have another hyphen, just like so, and then we have the year, and then we end the strong tag, and then of course underneath that what we have is the description, which is just a bit of lorem ipsum, and then obviously we close our anchor, and that's it. So go ahead and save that now, and if I just hit refresh, you'll notice that this menu doesn't actually update, because again we have to click on these buttons in order for the plugin to work. But you'll notice now that when I go back and forward again to March, all of my events show up. Now, something important to note is that if we want this to actually run as soon as the page loads in, what we're going to do is say, okay, well, when we've actually loaded in all of this data and everything else, then I also want to run my plugin get menu. So I can just copy this line right here and paste it in. So this will make sure that this runs for the first time. I can hit refresh, and now you're able to see that immediately we get the results for the current month. And if you want to take a look at the events.php, we can simply strip all of this out right now because we don't need it. And if we save that, we'll just get the same result, because obviously these anchors are being placed in here. So thank you for watching this lesson, and please join me in the next lesson where we'll continue on developing the events page.